Mike, we'll start with the Saints and bit of a hot button topic right now. Team meeting earlier today, which wasn't initially scheduled to address Drew Brees' remarks yesterday, but that was definitely a topic of conversation. Drew, of course, issued an apology now. Most players on the team seem to have accepted the apology. What can you tell us about the current state of the Saints locker room?
Well, I think, first of all, it had to be something Drew had to address quickly. He said what he said. First of all, I'm in a meeting with we have about a dozen people trying to get a project going up for the fall. Hopefully, with the coronavirus stuff, we'll be able to do it on another matter. And one of the comments somebody made was, "Man, what more could go wrong?" You look at that over the weekend of a possible wind and rain event due to a tropical storm. I mean, it's just sort of one event after the other. And then I get handed a cell phone, and I thought I was looking at a comment that Drew had made 4 years ago, to be honest with you, because that's almost exactly the type of the comment that he made 4 years ago. And what I realized that was from a recent interview he did with Yahoo Finance. I got to admit, I was surprised that was no empathy of the moment of what's actually happening today, and that he didn't quite get it at that point. And I understand the point, and he said what he said, and I think he meant what he said, no question about it, because we've had that talk, him and I. That, I grew up in a military family. My dad, my three uncles, two grandfathers, all served in the military. My dad was in the Pacific for World War II and in Korea. But, my dad had really never talked about much of any of that. Only thing he ever talked about was the fact that, he served with a bunch of other people of different nationalities, different how they grew up, everything else. And the only thing he really emphasized hard about that was, hey, listen, and he told me this as a teenager, you think you know everything about everything. But you also got to remember in life that the people that didn't make it back, what they sacrificed for, they gave you the ability to voice an opinion in a free country. And so don't take advantage of that part of it. Understand what you're talking about. And secondly, the best thing I can tell you right now is to do a lot less talking and a lot more listening, because that's how you learn. I think about that always. That wasn't just a few years back. And you always sort of think about stuff your dad and your mom said, and you say, "Oh, I'll never repeat that to my kids or my grandchildren." Guess what? You repeat it. And I think for Drew, it surprised many people that, it was almost like a stock answer that you hear if people get caught being asked a question they don't want to deal with, they kind of go to that real quickly. Or a politician, they go to that real quickly. They give you a stock answer. And that stuff about, the grandfathers, I've heard numerous times. And I get it, and I respect what his grandfathers did. And I respect, his opinion. Only thing is, I don't have to agree with everything he says. Just like nobody has to agree exactly what I say on things. Now Drew has to do some fence mending in that locker room, because you got to understand, not everybody grew up like he did. Not everybody grew up like I did. Not everybody grew up like you did or anyone else that's listening. We all have a similar situation to an extent, but we have a lot of differences too. And he totally missed it yesterday. What an opportunity to kind of hit the mark. Now, he said it a little bit later on in the interview, but what everybody picks up is the early part of the interview. And, it's not going to be cleared up tomorrow, put it to you that way. And I know all the good things he has done in this community. for his time, his efforts, his money to spend to try to help this community after Katrina and to do things afterwards. You know, a lot of people say, well, he got money, he can spend it. Well, my thing is, I know people who got money who don't do it, who absolutely don't do it, will not get involved in anything. You know, especially people of a certain age, man, you know, they think kind of like they're going to take it with them, no matter what. And I know that, you know, he didn't hit it yesterday. He missed an opportunity there. But I also know all the good things he's done, too, for this community. I know what he has done in a lot of major charities, things behind the scenes that most people don't even know about. He's not hitting his chest about, hey, I'm giving scholarships out, you know, because we talked about, because we involved in a similar charity. And, you know, he's not hitting his chest about the money that he's given and the time he's given and going behind the scenes to talk to people about it. He's not doing that. Now, if you want to do that, that's fine. And I applaud anybody's efforts to help someone else. But I think we've got to the point now where this issue is, you know, has to be addressed, and it's not going to happen overnight. I think all of us realize that. You're a certain age, you've seen this happening and coming along for a long time. And now Drew's got to mend that fence in the locker room, because that's what matters today for him. You know, his teammates, the people that had great respect for him and believed in him. Now, you know, I know publicly they may say, yeah, everything's good. Yeah, I'm not sure about that. You know, I can't get into their heads. I think for some people, everything's fine. He issued the apology and said what he had to say. And again, we have all been in that spot of working with people who have a totally different look at the world than we do. We still work with them, right?
Right, yeah.
Still work with them. No matter what, we still work with them. But our opinions of them may change because of that. But you got to be able to listen. And it doesn't matter if you 15, 25, 55, 65. Now, once you get past that, you know, because I got a mom who's 88 years old, going on 89. She don't want to hear nothing no more, especially stuff I tell her. So, you know, you get to that point where you're stuck in your values, you're stuck in your ways, you're stuck in your thoughts. But you always got to evolve in life. And I think that's something, when people ask me about success, that's part of it that I've been able to listen. You got to be able to listen to people. And things change. Your thoughts and your opinions on things that you had maybe as a 25-year-old are totally different at 45 years old, because events made them change. Events made them change. They got, you know, it's like that all over. But the sad thing, I think, today is that for some people, if you don't totally agree with them 100%, then you dead wrong. You dead wrong about everything. And that's not life. You know, just because somebody disagrees with you, all you got to do is go on social media. So that's all you got to do. Man, real quickly, that you find out that they don't totally agree with you, then you're part of the problem.
They'll flat out tell. I mean, they're telling you that word for word.
And so it's a complicated issue for that locker room. But because Drew, I think, has had so much, comp for what he has done and what he has done for the area, the way he has treated people, okay, and his teammates, I think that can be mended out. But again, that's not going to happen overnight. It just won't. And Drew's got a little bit of work to do there, despite the fact, you know, here's a guy that 48 hours ago, I think most people would have said, man, you know, he's part of us. Man, I'm behind him 100%. Now, all of a sudden, it's flipped, and it reminds me of something that happened last fall. Coach O appears with John Bell Edwards at an event, you know, because, you know, he was running for election. Man, if I didn't get 5 dozen people text me or message me about, man, what is Coach O doing with John Bell Edwards? He should just be worried about coaching. You know, why is he with John Bell Edwards? You know, my thing about it is, I thought he was an American citizen. He got the right to do what he wants to do. Now, all of a sudden, some of those same people that wrote me that, when he went to the White House in January, was, man, that's unbelievable. You know, man, great to see Coach O at the White House and everything else. And I got people from, you know, the other, well, why is he at the White House? So you damn if you do, you damn if you don't. Huh? Either way with that, but it sort of, it was not in the same vein, but it sort of reminded me of either you with me or you not. It's one of those type of things. And so for Drew, I think for him, he's got to do some fence mending in that locker room, and he's got the right coach to help along. There are some leaders on that team like Cam Jordan, Demario Davis, that I think and Teron Armstead, people like that back him 100% because they have walked down that aisle with him and how he has treated them and their families, and they know what he's done off the field. So always something. But yesterday, you know, I just think he missed the mark with it. And not that he didn't say it later on in the interview, but it was almost the stock answer that we heard 4 years ago, and he didn't quite get the point of the kneeling and that point. And everybody's got different opinions on protest. Now, the stuff that's happening with the looting and everything else, and the killings that has happened with policemen, come on, that's nobody that thinks that that's right. We all know that that's wrong with that. But it's how you handle things and also the moment. Had Drew said that 3 months ago, you know, people would have said, well, I've heard that before from Drew. But look what's happened in the last 10 days.
Mike, I want to get into some LSU here. Coach O was talking on Off the Bench earlier this week about the defensive back position and how it is probably the second deepest position group on the team outside the defensive line. He talked about leaders that would emerge from the position, but what I really want to get your take on is who plays opposite Derek Stingley. The first name out of his mouth was Cordell Flott, but he did give a long list of guys who could challenge. Is that spot that wide open as Coach O maybe made it seem to believe?
Yeah, I think it is. You know, and he's talked highly of Cordell, the type of talent he is. Jay Ward is also somebody brought up in the conversation. The guy that I'm most interested in, and we didn't get a chance to see him, Elias Ricks. So all I know is everybody, and I've seen him on the tape, and I've watched him. Everybody from that area out in the West Coast that has watched him says he ain't watching. He's playing. So it's going to be interesting to me on who gets that spot, but is who gets the slot position, because that's now become 3/4 of a starter. Mm-hmm. I know Oed told me that they out of base 80% of the time. So now your third corner is a 3/4 starter at that corner position. And so, yeah, it's some competition there. There's no question. But I would say just listening to him, that Flott is the guy that I think he expects is going to be the starter. But it's going to be interesting to see who gets that slot spot. And does Jay Ward or an Elias Ricks or, you know, whoever's going to be involved with all that into that particular part, and how Bo Pelini feels about it, too. We sort of know a little bit about what Aranda was looking for in the slot. Is Bo gonna be that way in that position? And so I'm interested in, because of the fact that injuries are going to happen, that you just can't have three guys. Basically, at corner today, you better have five guys ready to play because of an injury, because of nickel and dime coverages. You better have five guys. Now, you can say, well, you know, that's difficult. But no, that's the ways of the world today in college football. When they're going to strike you at four wideouts, okay, you got to match up. You're not playing football in the backyard anymore. This is college football, so you got to be able to match up. So I think the development of the young corners is going to be a hard watch and an interesting watch as they get into whatever we're going to see of fall drills, because you know early that is probably because of getting everything straight on offense.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm talking about offensive line, because I think that's the big question mark up front as a group of how quickly that can come together. That the secondary at corner is gonna be the interesting watch, because you have some talent there, really talented players there, and most of them don't have a lot of experience. Flott has more than any of it at that cornerback spot. Ward's got a little bit. Ricks is going to be, a freshman coming in, and kind of what happens with Kary Vincent in that spot. What is going to be Hampton's role on this defensive side, and how that works out. So, yeah, it's an interesting thing. But man, every year there is always one or two freshmen you point out and you say, man, I want to watch him play. And on offense, certainly Eric Gilbert at tight end. And always telling you that, okay? He's telling you we building formations for him, sort of like what the Lions used with Calvin Johnson. On defense, every time he talks about defense, what are the two defensive players he brings up first?
Andre Anthony, Jaquelin Roy, and
Elias Ricks.
Yeah.
Those two names come out of his mouth real quickly when he talks about it, with Roy and also with Elias. So, it's an area, too, where a couple years back they didn't have the numbers and missed out on some recruits late. And that's going to happen. That's part of the recruiting game. But now you've got some numbers there, and now you got a lot of young players, and also, too, Redarius Jones is another player we haven't talked about, but he was a guy that played a lot of offense in high school in Mississippi, and you brought him in here as a cornerback, and how quickly, he's adapted to that. And that's the toughest part about not having the spring, but nobody had it, so everybody's in the same boat. But it's that ability for those young players to get in some reps, to get in some time, and also some teaching there where you can give it to them small method, and come the fall, ain't nothing small about the summer workouts. I mean, you getting that's just the way it's going to be, because you got to prepare for the games which are right around the corner, and how quickly Todd Harris comes back, because even before Harris played one game at LSU, I did a speaking event with Coach, and he sort of whispered it to me that, hey, man, Harris, I think, has got a chance to be a special player, really special. And he says, he's a great communicator. He said, man, he really works at it. He's very smart. He's got radar that's always tuned in, and he's got some ball hawk skills. And I think last year, losing him, they had some depth there, but him coming back, I think, was huge to get him back. And then Jacoby Stevens deciding to stay for his senior season. So it gives you a little bit of time to bring on some of the younger players that they've recruited. And I think he wants to change up, and he's brought up the fact that Bo has told him, go find me another LaRon Landry.
Right.
Yeah, right. Those guys, they got thousands of them out there like LaRon. Come on. We know that LaRon was a special player. LaRon played his high school football right up the road from me at Hornville, and, he was a quarterback there too, and then he makes that transition, and then, man, he became a big-time defender, certainly for LSU. So I like what they have in the secondary. There's a lot more that you sort of know about the secondary people than, say, about the defensive ends. And I do agree with him, it's a thick area. The defensive ends part, now defensive tackles, you know a lot about most of those guys that are inside. The big question mark is out on the edges, because you got that dreaded word, potential. which means you ain't done it yet. But, again, that's an interesting area because of the fact you just can't find enough of those guys out on the edge. And hopefully that, you can maybe have a young player kind of develop for you at the defensive end spot. But, man, corner, you got some guys there and young players that are going to play and see a lot of action quickly because of the game itself. It's 3-4 wideouts, spread the field, and they're looking for the weak link in the chain. Who are we going to go after? Now, last year, okay, you had Fulton on one side, you had Stingley on the other. They went after Kary. Okay, well, it don't take a rocket scientist to figure that one out. Are you going to throw the football at Fulton? Are you going to throw the football at Stingley?
Nope.
Let's take out Shotwood Vincent. That's where they went after. And so he got picked on. The fact that he kind of stood up, and he had his moments, good and bad, but that's where they were attacking a lot of times. What wasn't his part? That's got nothing to do with anything more than the fact they thought he was the third best cover corner that LSU had. So I'm going to go after him. Because of the talents of Stingley, because I think early on you had a couple teams that maybe sort of wanted to test him to see, we'll see how good the rookie is. They found out, that ain't a good idea. Maybe we ought to start throwing it on the other side a little bit. And then, Vincent got it. But they do have depth there and have a lot of young players. And so to answer your question, I think Flott, it seems to me, just by you listening to him, would seemingly be the guy starting opposite. I think the big question mark is when you go in nickel and dime, who becomes the 3 and the 4?
So you brought up Kary Vincent there, and I want to touch on him a little bit more too, because like you said, he had his moments last year, good and bad. He ended up second on the team in interceptions, 47 tackles, I think is what I saw earlier this week when I was doing some looking up on Kary Vincent. What role do you think he potentially plays? Is he because you said who gets that third corner spot? Well, I mean, Kary played a little bit there, but mainly at the nickel safety. Where do you envision him in this defense this season?
Again, what I don't know, but only because we haven't seen it on where Bo Pelini thinks he's best. Okay, because what happened last year, that's under another coach.
Right.
Now you got Bo coming in and figuring out what's best for Kary. I agree with you. I think he's better off at the safety position. And he may be the guy that you bring in certain, situations because of the fact he can play both. Okay? He can play both. He can play in the nickel and he can play at the safety spot. And he's got experience and he's got speed. And I thought he got better. He withstood a lot of throws his way. And it showed he had some backbone. Because, listen, Ed Reed told me this years ago. Mike, it don't matter what you did in high school. It don't matter one bit. When you get in college, and especially when you get in the pros, they test you and test you and test you. And they want to break you down mentally. Ain't got nothing to do with physically breaking you down. They want to break you down in between those ears. And then you start making physical mistakes. And so Kary withstood it. But for me to tell you definitively of how he's going to be used in Pelini's defense, I don't know if anybody can do it at this point. He's part of the mix, but how they're going to use him at corner, and because I think they'll use him at both, is part of the I don't know at this stage.
The NFL informed teams that coaches will now be allowed to return to team facilities starting tomorrow, and that now increases the maximum personnel allowed to 100. The two questions kind of here. Are the players next? Will they make it back? And what does this do for the Saints' plans? Of course, the Saints had said no offseason, there's no virtual offseason or anything like that. They just reconvene for training camp.
Yeah, Sean had made that announcement right around draft time that, listen, I trust you. Come back in shape, in the best shape you can be in, and we crank this up. Take care of your families. Take care of your friends' families. And at that point, we were still and we're still in it. A lot of I don't know situation. So what it's more difficult for, so I think, is the younger teams with new coaches. I think about Carolina. You got a new head coach who's never been a head coach at the NFL level before. Never. He's done it in college, and he's been an assistant. But he started wanting to change the environment in the locker room, his own sort of spin on it, similar to what Sean Payton did in '06. And he's made a ton of changes. So you got a lot of new players, okay, and then you can't have them there. So that becomes where I think in this year, and I have a friend of mine who actually grew up in the Thibodeau area, but now he's the head of sports gambling at the Wynn Hotel. They got a Cajun somewhere in the bunch. No matter where you go, they got one. He's mixed up. So him or her is mixed up somewhere in it. But he was telling me that played a big part in how they kind of put the over and under totals, that they favored much more the veteran teams that didn't have all this turnover of players and maybe of coaches, and that some of the teams that went through the coaching changes and you started to see some of the free agents that were going and coming, that was the uncertainty of not having those spring drills, not having the OTAs, not having, the rookie camps and everything else. That's going to be pretty tough. And for all young players, it's going to make it a much more difficult training camp because you haven't had that rookie camp. You haven't had the OTAs to work out with the veteran players. It's going to make it tough. Now, some of the early draft choices, you understand they're going to make the team. It's going to be the later round picks, the rookie undrafted free agents. I mean, they put in a spot here that it's, you got a real short look at them, and then you got to make a decision. And hopefully, we'll be back to at least a greater form of normalcy by August when all this kind of kicks off. But you can understand why Vegas did what they did with some of the veteran teams, figuring that they had the advantage here. Nothing that they really did themselves. Basically, it was based off of what you had coming back. And you look at a team like the Chiefs with very little loss personnel-wise. They kept basically their almost entire staff, and so you come back to defend. And San Francisco, they've made a few changes here and there, but they still a very formidable football team. The same thing with the Saints. Coaching staff-wise, the Saints lost Mike Nolan, but you got everybody else back on the coaching staff. You did an excellent job in the offseason of keeping most of your core players. Von Bell did go to Cincinnati, but, you brought in Malcolm Jenkins. You brought in Emmanuel Sanders that can help your football team, and the chip players that can maybe help you add some depth to this football team. So I get it, but man, the younger teams or teams going through transition, like a Carolina or a real young football team, which you see Joe Burrow's on in Cincinnati, man, good luck there, buddy, because you can see where the teams would experience and football's not a switch. You can't flip it off and on. But there is a bit of a groove that you can get into much quicker than if you got a lot of young pieces moving around the board.
So do you think that players are the next step? I mean, or would they make it
back?
I think
it is. I think it is. Again, that protocol of exactly how it's going to be done is going to be the interesting part. And we're seeing the story emerge at University of Alabama now.
Yeah.
Where 5 players have tested positive, and a couple players that have been around them now, they sort of quarantined off. And listen, that's going to happen in the NFL, partner. That's not a hard call to make. That's going to happen in the NFL too, with that. And how the NFL is going to deal with it and how individual teams deal with it. And we had a meeting with another company that I work with, and we were talking about, of a scenario of events and kind of worst case and how we would handle it and how an NFL team's going to handle it. What happens on a Friday before the second game of the year? You have two offensive linemen test positive, the center and the guard, or the center and the tackle. They've been in all those rooms with all those same center, guards, tackles. How is that team going to address that? And so, and we're just talking about that position, and we just kind of pulled it and said, what happens if, and how do you address it, if that occurs? I think, and that's still kind of floating in the minds of teams. Will they be given an exemption, so to speak, at the end roster size? I have no idea. What comes down to money, the one thing with the NFL, man, they don't want to spend nothing more than they got to. So I think, somebody brought up about extending the rosters. Man, they ain't paying for nothing. I mean, they ain't paying for that. That's not happening. How a team would address that if that happens early in the regular season, and where do you go from there? From that point, because those two players, if they tested positive, that's basically 2 weeks that they're going to be out, and at least 2 weeks. And the players that have been around them, what happens there? I have no idea of how that is going to work out. But you can see that sort of scenario could potentially happen, and you will have players that go to camp. We saw it at Oklahoma State. We're seeing it at Alabama. You don't think that's going to happen in the NFL?
Right.
That's going to happen there, too, of how they address that. And this is even before the season starts, before training camp even starts. Now, what happens if it happens during the year? How a team would address that, man, we're walking down some grounds that we haven't walked before, but we know eventually that will happen to some team in the NFL or teams.
What veteran free agent wide receiver would you like to see the Saints sign?
Veteran free agent. Man, I think if they would have done that, I think they would have done it already. I think bringing in Ty Montgomery, who can play both, I think fills that void. Because now you got a guy that has started at both halfback and wide receiver. And so you went out and got that guy a couple weeks back in Ty Montgomery.
Ask Mike, do you think there will be animosity between Brees and Thomas this year?
No. I think that, that's going to be worked out. They may have other guys on the team. And no matter what, again, and I bring up the fact, we've all worked with people that we don't totally agree with them. And we don't understand why they don't understand. But we still work with them, right? That's not going to be no animosity. And if I'm Drew Brees, I'm not going to throw to Michael Thomas.
Yeah.
He's the one guy I can count on. Come on. That gets stretched a little bit with all this because of the fact the one thing with Drew, he understands who Michael Thomas is. And, and I know what type of competitor and player Michael Thomas is. So, no, I don't think that's going to be an issue once the season gets started. But I do think that Drew is going to have to kind of make amends certain ways here because I think he feels now their pain because he heard it and he read it.
Ask Mike, fans at football games this fall?
Yeah, I think they will. I'm not sure early on how that's all going to be measured out, but I do believe you're going to have fans in the stands for the start of the regular season and start of college football. Now, I really didn't know 2 months ago. If you'd asked me that, I would have said, man, you may be playing in front of an empty stadium. But listening to what Roger Goodell is talking, are you coming away saying that they're not going to have fans in the stands? No, he's not talking that way. He's talking about having people in the stands from game one. Now, how that'll look, if that will be 3/4, a quarter of a stadium, half a stadium, I don't know how they're going to do all that. If you start telling people, man, listen, I paid for my ticket and I can't go, You're going to have a difficult deal on that. But yes, I do think you'll have fans in the stands this fall.
Ask Mike, Everson Griffin coming to New Orleans?
I think with that, Everson's got a lot of different ways to go. But I feel almost like if I were representing Everson, I would feel the same way if I were representing Cam Newton, that something's going to happen here to open us up an avenue to give us a better money flow. Because, he understands at his age, he's sort of at the end of the career. Despite, I think he's still a very good football player. My thing with that's going to be is there's going to be an injury, there's going to be an incident that opens up a spot somewhere that he can get a better chance to maximize his money. And so if I'm his agent, okay, I haven't signed. We in June today. All I have to do is wait. Do you think really Everson Griffin needs training camp? Man, he's done all the training camp he needs, so to speak, in his life. I want him on the field on Sunday. I would wait it the same way with Cam. You almost, and it sounds morbid, but it's true. It's just sports reality. Something's going to happen, either a physical injury or something off the field or whatever, that's going to open up that avenue for Griffin. And who knows where it's going to end up. I do know the Cardinals have shown him a lot of interest, and so has Seattle. And I think everybody's sort of waiting. Wait, what happens with Clowney? And then that may be the one domino to fall that opens up the gate also, too, for Griffin. But, man, I'm waiting. At this stage, I don't need training camp. I've been through plenty training camps. I'm looking for the best way to maximize my money.
All right, Mike. Thanks, man. Great stuff as always. Talk to you next week.
Thanks so much. Appreciate it, bud.